Hi, I'm William Stewart, co-founder of Teleios. Welcome back to our verse-by-verse study on the book of Acts. We're following Paul and his incredible journey from Jerusalem to Rome. And Paul has been sent to Caesarea from Jerusalem for judgment, with the captain of the guard in Jerusalem finding no fault with Paul and wanting to get him away from the riotous, murderous, non-believing Jews. Sends him to Felix, the procurator of Palestine, and for further determination. So we've speculated the reason for this is that God is providing a testimony to the Roman leadership and to the that Christianity is a worthwhile religion and benign, not a threat to rebellion in the Roman world, over which the emperors were so paranoid about somebody trying to take them over and their position as emperor. So we pick up the action in chapter 24, verse 22. So when Felix heard these things, and having a more perfect knowledge of that way, otherwise Christianity is known as the way 7 or 8 times in the book of Acts, he deferred them and said, when Lysias, that's the chief captain, shall come, I will know more about the matter. So he kept Paul, kept him at liberty, and Paul talked to him about the faith. And he seemed to enjoy this and commune with him often, hearing about the Christian faith. So there's an acceptance at some level with Felix and the faith. But he didn't let him go. He was hoping for a bribe and not getting it, the bribe for his freedom. He left him there, and also as a favor to the Jews, down in verse 27 at the end of the chapter. So again, we're seeing, we talked about before that in a sense, Paul, and again, this is controversial, perhaps modeled the pain and suffering of Christ at his trial. We see at the end of the Gospels, he's modeling it to the current Jewish and Gentile world 30 years later, so people could understand what Christ went through. But of course, a big difference here, when the Jews pressed Pontius Pilate, he allowed Christ to be condemned and executed. And the Roman authorities are not doing that here. So there's a big difference. But they're also keeping him. They're not letting him go, showing the corruption of the Roman world, which was so prevalent, especially after the fall of the Roman Republic when Julius Caesar became the first dictator, and then later the Augusti, if I say that right, starting with Caesar Augustus. And so no surprise that he wanted a bribe. And but Paul would not give this. I don't think he really had the capacity. So then to Acts 25, we start in verse 1. Festus then came to be the next procurator. He was procurator in 59 to 60, taking over from Felix. And he went up to Jerusalem and listened to the chief priests. So after 2 years, the chief priests, they were so mad at Paul, they remembered him and brought the issue up to Festus and wanted him. And Festus goes in verse 4, we're going to keep him in Caesarea. When you're able, come down and you can tell me your problems with Paul at that time. So they tarried there for a while, 10 days. In verse 6, when they came down to Jerusalem and told Festus many terrible things that Paul did and was. But of course, they could not prove it. So Festus then asked Paul, and he gave his defense, saying, whatever I did or who I am, I offended nobody at all. So Festus asked him, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and, let them judge you? And Paul goes, basically, no. He goes, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be a judge. I appeal to Caesar, which was his right as a Roman citizen. So Festus immediately replied, you've appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar you shall go. Of course, he was in Rome. So not only were the Roman officials corrupt, they also didn't want to judge. Even back to Pontius Pilate, he did not want to make a decision. He tried to cast off the decision about Jesus Christ, and he could not um, divest himself of this from the pressure from the Jews. But we see perhaps the captain of the guard in bringing Paul to safety in Caesarea didn't want to deal with it anymore. And Felix seemed to gladly turn him over to Festus, not wanting to make a final judgment. Festus goes, oh, go back to Jerusalem and just let them judge you. And Paul goes, no, I appeal to Caesar. And Festus gladly goes, okay, off you go. So there's the corruption, the inability to want to make a decision and take responsibility. Well, I think, again, God is using this series of events to keep Paul in custody. And again, this might be controversial, so decide for yourself. Again, to make these proclamations to the Roman authorities, paving a way for the acceptance of Christianity at some level so it can spread, which certainly occurred. So he's using Paul in this new role and perhaps even manipulating events here to keep him in such a way to come to Rome, to the emperor, the highest level in the empire, the most powerful man in the world at that time. Think about it. If he hadn't gone there in custody, and we don't know what happened before Caesar, it's not recorded, but he probably never could have made a testimony to him. He couldn't have just walked in and to ask to see Caesar and to mention the gospel to him and Jesus Christ. He would have been kicked out probably by the Praetorian Guard. But here, in appealing to Caesar, Caesar had to listen to him. So very interesting. But it was important enough that Paul spent much of his last years of his life in this system going to Rome. As God promised, he would go to Rome, and he fulfilled that prophecy. Okay, thank you for joining me today. We will continue next time with Paul in front of Agrippa the second, and please join me then.